What's the worst best thing you've ever seen happen at a wedding? When my uncle got married, the best man dropped the ring. In the dead silence of the church you could hear it ting 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 as it bounced along the floor, followed by one of the groomsmen stage whispering Jesus Christ loud enough for everyone to hear. The pastor didn't even bat an eye, just said, "The ring has already been blessed. Thank you," and carried on. That pastor has class. I walked by an outdoor wedding in which the bride walked into man-eater and the groom walked into gold digger. Either the whole family has a great sense of humor or the marriage is doomed. Roller skate wedding. Bride fell down and opened a gusher on her head. They finished the ceremony and took her to the hospital. She ended up needing emergency surgery to drain fluid buildup in her head and ended up having to relearn how to walk. The adverse effects were from the surgery that saved her life, not the accident itself. Sometimes to save someone, you gotta frick some crap up. Sometimes to save someone, you gotta frick some crap up. I need to get that embroidered onto something. I was at my cousin's wedding. Not actually related, but she's my godmother's daughter. Her and her husband hired this performer for their reception. This woman was dressed up like a plant and was in what looked like a large cement planter outside. My mother and I decided to sit right next to where she was. Every so often she would change position, but did so kind of slowly, almost like she was being moved by the wind in slow motion. Now that in and of itself isn't really that cool. What was great though, was the fact that this woman dressed as a plant was manufacturing fun for herself. She would stay still and wait for people to stop in front of her and start a conversation. When she was sure they hadn't noticed her, she would start moving and scare the crap out of the people that were there. My mother and I got a good hour or so of amusements from that. That's hilarious. Love it. My ex-husband and I were at his cousin's wedding. Another cousin of his, 25/M, was a groomsman. He was a giant guy, 6'4", roughly 400 pounds, and the life of the party, picking kids up and throwing them in the air, holding the groom on his shoulders, dancing like a maniac, having a blast. I went to the bathroom and came back to the reception to the music cut and everyone circled around the dance floor just panicked. There was Matt, completely purplish reddened on the floor while a guest performed CPR and others were calling 911, taking his pulse, screaming. He passed away from a massive heart attack, pronounced dead on the scene. The reception ended right then and there, obviously. The bride and groom were supposed to leave for their honeymoon to Hawaii that same evening. They ended up not going and instead they stayed home to attend the funeral where the groom was a pallbearer. With all due respect, there are worse ways to spend your last day on earth. Sounds like he died like he lived, having a blast. My buddy married a woman who was estranged from most of her family save her 90-plus-year-old grandpa. They were so close and he was in poor health that the wedding was held in grandpa's backyard so he could be there. 36 hours before the wedding he had a massive heart attack and was rushed to the ER. They were recommending hospice palliative care and bride-to-be was going to call off the wedding. Grandpa insisted it go on even with him not being at his own house because people were flying from all over the country, all during intermittent bouts of consciousness. Fast forward to the wedding and this determined granddad broke out of the hospital, just unhooked all his equipment IV stuff and took a cab to his own house hours before the wedding. The family that was invited was incredibly upset but knew how close he was to the bride and he ended up staying through the whole ceremony without issue. Slept in his bed and then returned to the hospital the next day. Think he also drank a few beers. Absolute legend of a man. Grandpa, hold my IV. There was a couple who had been best friends forever, like many years. They never put the boyfriend-girlfriend label on anything, but they were both in the military, lived together, and were an item long before they introduced each other as girlfriend and boyfriend. By the time they started dating they only really dated for about a year before they got married, even though they'd effectively been together for over a decade. Their families knew each other, everyone who knew them knew they were going to eventually get married. It wasn't weird if you knew them. During their wedding, they were brought to the dance floor to play some kind of newlywed game while the DJ who didn't know them emceed the event. He asked how long they dated, to which they said just under a year. The DJ goes on this rant about how he can't believe people that only know each other for a short period of time and get married. He unironically asked them if they understood that they were getting married and that he seriously doubted that they'd known each other for long enough to make that kind of commitment. Yikes. My best friend's biological father, who took off when she was very young, threw a fit and made everyone from his family leave because my best friend did her father-daughter dance with her stepdad, who has raised her in her father's absence. Don't get mad at the daughter because you are a frickin' deadbeat. Bio dad was an ashat. My wife was recently a bridesmaid for her friend who she hadn't really seen in a few years. It was actually a nice wedding and the reception was also pretty nice. Unfortunately, the groomsman my wife was paired with was under the impression that she was going to go home with him after the wedding. Me and my wife have been together for almost 20 years, and some rondo she met 1 or 2 times is going to sweep her off her feet when her husband and kid are in the same room? Apparently this is a thing. My stepdad's groomsman tried to stick his tongue down my very pregnant and married aunt's mouth at their wedding. He called her a freaking tease and had to be removed from the reception. Best, bride and groom both happy crying at the altar. Worst, another man proposing to his girlfriend during the reception. Never seen but heard about. Someone else proposing to the bride during the ceremony. What a dong move. Proposed to someone on someone else's wedding night. The minister was doing their speech during the ceremony and asked, rhetorically, "What is love? Baby don't hurt me," was muttered by several groomsmen, who all started cracking up. The minister should have angry snapped no more. My cousin had her wedding at a zoo because she was a vet tech and her first date was at a zoo as well as her engagement, so it just made sense. I was a bridesmaid, so we got to get especially up close to the animals. The giraffes kept trying to eat the bouquets during the pictures, and they were non-toxic, so it was mostly just funny and cute. OMG, I want a zoo wedding. At my wedding, the maid of honor gave a 15-minute speech that did nothing but reference her breakup, and then me and my wife's prior relationships in gruesome detail. Longest 15 minutes of my life. We're no longer married. Gay male wedding in England. Registrar stands at front of the ceremony before starting the vows and for some inexplicable reason says, "Get your rings ready, boys." Cue 30 gays bursting out in uncontrollable laughter, and the older family members at the front looking round confused and or disapprovingly. I don't get it. Watching the groom and his best men ride the bathtub that was used for the beer down a hill and not die. It was a hill for loading boats into a river. It was like a 150-foot ride and they got going scary fast. The bath broke into pieces but all 5 of the men were fine, somehow. This sounds like a Friday night in rural England. The bride and groom are at the altar. The minister is speaking, saying something to the effect of, "We are here in the presence of friends and family who are all here to give this union their blessing." To which the groom's mother stands up and says, "No, not everyone. I do not give this my blessing. It was both horrible and kind of hilarious." I was at a wedding where the family had a tradition that between the wedding and the reception, the couple would take a 15-minute break to share a large bowl of chicken soup. They ate at a table in the middle of the courtyard and no one was allowed to come near. Not only does it prevent the starving bride problem, but it emphasizes that they are accountable only to each other. Cute. At my wedding, the registrar said the best man's name instead of mine during the I do's and my wife was too busy staring at me to notice. My mate with pure class started to stand up and walk up to take my place. I gave him the evil monkey stare and the whole room was laughing pretty hard. The registrar's face was bright red and she apologized for it, lol. Wait, I don't usually go to weddings, so how would that happen? This is pretty tame compared to some of Wild's experiences, but here it goes. My parents never got a real wedding due to them both being in the military and my mom being deployed to Desert Storm fairly last minute. They did the Justice of the Peace ceremony before she left for Saudi. For their 20th anniversary, they decided to have a small vow renewal ceremony on their favorite beach near where they first met with a couple family members and close friends, and some amazing shenanigans went down. 1. While my mom was getting ready, the setting of her wedding ring came clean off, and we searched the hotel room for an hour to find the stone. We half jokingly, half superstitiously wondered if my dad was going to meet a horrible end that day. 2. I was my mom's bridesmaid, but the day before the ceremony, I crashed my bicycle and got hella whiplash. I couldn't move my neck at all and kept it tilted in the most awkward position for the next day. We sent my dad out to get some aspirin and he accidentally gets the stuff laced with NyQuil. We didn't realize this until too late. I spent the first half of the ceremony wobbling and trying not to pass out, and it shows in some of the photos. 3. During the entire ceremony, some drunk idiot we've never seen before set up camp on the rocks right next to where we were. He was super off key, yelling, singing all the lyrics to Let's Get It On. The chaplain himself couldn't keep a straight face. 4. My cousin was in charge of videotaping the ceremony on my mom's cheap digital camcorder, and she did a pretty good job for a 13-year-old kid. However, on our way to the reception, a guy pulls up next to our car on his bike completely butt naked, and my cousin couldn't resist snagging a shot of that. Turns out, she recorded over some of my dad's would have been beautiful vows. My mom now has a 10-second clip of a naked cyclist as part of her wedding video. This was probably my favorite story when we were reminiscing at their 30th anniversary last year. OMG, the cousin who recorded the wrong thing. So funny. At my cousin's wedding, one of his college friends got really drunk. There was this part during the after party where it was just the bride and groom dancing while everyone else stood around in a circle, but he kept pushing in and dancing with them. After about 30 seconds, the best man, another one of my cousin's college friends, finds the perfect opportunity to tackle the guy out of the circle without hitting my cousin or his wife. IDKY, but I pictured Christ Pratt being the tackle guy when I read this. The bride's two sisters recited the bridal shower speeches, word for word, from the movie Bridesmaids. Didn't change anything, and the majority of the attendees did not get it. That was the entirety of their toast. It was completely impersonal and so awkward to experience. My uncle is very cheap and he did not order any table chairs for the reception, and none of us knew about it before, so everyone just kinda awkwardly stood around and ate the food. Some people sat on the floor. I'm not going to lie, I would leave a wedding if there were no chairs. Worst, the very drunk groom screaming in the face of the wedding planner, me, because the bar ran out of Grey Goose. We wouldn't have been able to keep serving him anyway, or when a different bride's uncle showed up to deliver the wedding cake and he didn't secure it in his car, so the whole thing toppled over. The worst thing involved the priest's homily at my uncle's wedding. He basically said marriage doesn't last forever and not expected to last so long. Exactly everything you wouldn't want to hear, especially from a priest. Best thing was at the same wedding, my uncle's friends rigged a cannon to go off at the end of the wedding. It went off, scaring the heck out of everyone and having the police show up with rifles. Best and worst was at my wedding. We had a photo go viral the next day. We kissed, our second kiss, mind you, with the officiant holding an achievement unlocked, obtain a wife sign. Our friend who took the picture put it on Reddit the next day and it exploded. We saw so many posts of people loving it, hating it, calling my wife fat, calling me a misogynist for making her have that on the first kiss. Never mind, not only was it not the first kiss, but it wasn't even my idea to have it. My wife's a much more hardcore gamer than I have ever been, and she's the one who had it made. She and I both shed a few tears in sadness, anger, frustration, and even laughed a bit at the time, and neither of us went near it for years after. That was 7 years ago. We're still very happily married. The sign is over our TV still, and we see our image pop up on websites trying to claim it every couple of months still. I don't know if we were the first to do it, but for sure we were the first to have it go viral. I was at my best friend's wedding reception, and I was watching them dance. I was barely within earshot of them, and the groom was chattering about how the evening was going. He suddenly interrupted himself and beamed at her with, "You're my wife, it was so beautiful." Well, as an old married person, I still feel that way sometimes. I look at her with amazement. "You're my wife." At a wedding between a black man and white man, the grandmother of the black groom got up at the reception to give a toast. She started, "The first time my grandson introduced me to him, I turned and said to him, 'You know I don't like white people.'" The room erupted into laughter and hysteria. The groom quickly grabbed the mic from her and made her sit down, so we never got to know where she was going with that, which was probably for the best. Wait, I totally want to know where she was going with that though. The bride's ex-gate crashed the wedding, snatched the garland, equivalent to ring, from the groom and tried to place it on the bride. He was thrashed by almost everyone close to the bride or the groom. I am not one of them. The police we called and I left after that, but the marriage took place. Officiant at a conservative Christian wedding said during his talk, "So, the wedding night. During my wedding night, there was something I wanted to do, but I was too nervous to ask for it, so I didn't say anything. But I encourage you to do it, and that thing is kneel and pray together." Best man lost it, and luckily it broke the tension. Hands down the awkwardest moment of my life. I was at large hotel and there was a good size wedding reception in the bar area. After a couple drinks I decided to use the restroom. I went into a stall and a bouquet of flowers was shoved into the toilet. I turned around to see a few guys that looked to be groomsmen and nicely dressed guests. I said that someone had shoved a bouquet in the toilet. One of the men proclaimed in a stereotypical gay accent, "Oh no he didn't." I then saw the group storm out. I went ahead and used another stall and washed up. When I returned to the bar area there was a complete full-on brawl happening. People were beating the crap out of each other, throwing stuff, screaming. I found my so at the time and we kind of stood by and watched. It poured out to the parking area and then the police showed up. Several people were arrested and I saw the poor bride crying her eyes out. This was in the middle of Wisconsin. These people all looked very attractive, healthy, suburban, upper middle class families. It was very surprising as I saw them all celebrating together only an hour or so before. This is a story about my ex-in-law's family. I doubt they are on Reddit, but I would like to share this as it is very touching. I've seen video footage of it as evidence and it's incredible. The father of the bride is Jack. He was a teacher all of his life and from the stories a very intelligent and interesting man. When I first met him, after the wedding I shall mention, he had full onset Alzheimer's. He could not communicate, had to be led around with a strap around his waist so he did not run away, and at that first dinner he kept eating the pats of butter with the wrappers on. He needed constant attention and monitoring and was oblivious to the world around him. I'd look him in the eye though and swear there was something going on in there. To the story of his daughter's wedding. This was a couple of years before I met him, but he was then still as unresponsive as I had known him. During the wedding, his daughter had insisted that no matter how she wanted to dance with her dad, she'd chosen an old song that I think he would sing to her as a kid. The song started and she managed to coax him up to his feet and led him around the dance floor a little, him staggering awkwardly. Then, as everyone watched on, the most incredible thing happened. From nowhere he started to smile, and then he looked at his daughter and started to sing the song. He had been completely mute for years and here, for this moment he came back to life. Everyone was crying their eyes out as he swung her around the dance floor, smiling and singing like the dad she had loved from before. The dance ended, and as quickly as his consciousness returned, it left again and he's not knowingly smiled or spoken since. But for that 2 or 3 minutes, when it mattered most to his daughter on her special day, Daddy came back. I saw a news feature about a nurse that would sing her dementia patient's song from their youth, and almost every time the patient's eyes would focus and then they would start humming or singing along. Your story is so sweet and touching. It made my night. Thank you. The groom slipped the bride a lot of tongue, like an awkward, gross amount of tongue which he already had stuck out before he leaned in for the kiss. Nobody was particularly prudish, but everyone was uncomfortable. We knew a dude named Mike, who really liked H. Mike decided during a speech he had to shoot up. Mike thought it was normal. Father of the groom stood up to make his toast. His toast consisted of asking his wife to confirm that he was not the groom's biological father. The wife said nothing, and everyone else pretended nothing had happened. As far as I know there wasn't even a rumor about that, so I don't know. Whoa, not the appropriate time for that. Grooms, maybe, Dad. Went to a friend's wedding years ago at a super nice venue overlooking Lake Travis outside Austin, on a cliff. It was to be an outdoor wedding. Just like clockwork, it starts pouring 10 minutes before it's supposed to begin. They scramble and move the ceremony to under the back covered patio at the main building of the venue. It's very crowded. Everyone is pretty wet. Pee in the rain is super loud. Looks to be a total disaster. The makeshift altar happened to be directly in front of the view of the lake, but it was so dark and rainy you couldn't even see the lake. All of a sudden, like in a freaking movie, the rain stops, the clouds pass and a huge rainbow appears directly behind the bride and groom over the lake. You couldn't have placed the rainbow any closer to the bride and groom, and it really was something special, along with the free food and booze and hotel room. College friends of mine were both from pretty fancy families back east. She had been raised by her mom and stepdad, who sprang for wedding and reception at their extra posh country club. Her dad and stepmom were also fancy people, but basically disinterested parties in the whole event until 2 days before the ceremony, when stepmom showed up to preview the location. She was aghast, shocked, about the condition of the wooden chairs the country club supplied for guests to sit on during the ceremony. So much so that she contacted the grounds department and demanded that the chairs be painted before the event. She offered to pay. Imagine the horror of all parties involved when the guests stood up after the ceremony finished with parallel horizontal stripes on their garments from the not dry fresh paint. The groundskeepers has painted the chairs the evening before the wedding. So not only did the jealous dad and stepmom pay for unnecessary chair painting, they paid for a shitload of dry cleaning. This reminds me so much of Drop Dead Gorgeous. The scene where they are doing the dance routine and their stools are still wet with paint is too good. Last week, at the start of my nephew's wedding, the minister asked, "Why are we here today?" And the groom replied, "Ma iwij. Dat wistawingman. Dat dweem within a dweem." Our videographer was about 45 minutes late to the ceremony, Catholic mass, so it's usually about an hour. Missed the vows and all the other usual wedding stuff. They stayed late to the reception to make up for it. Thankfully he was at least good enough to call and say he would be late so we could get some friends and family to take video at the last minute. But then we had to sue him to actually get our unedited video over 6 months after it was supposed to be finished. Currently looking for someone to make something decent out of the combination of cell phone videos and professional stuff. I grew up going to Jewish weddings, and tradition is to put the bride and groom on separate chairs and lift them into the air, and sometimes they hold hands over a divider that separates men and women. Well, I went to one where the bride fell off the chair and she started crying. I always felt like it was a bad idea in the first place ever since I was little, thinking what if this exact scenario plays out. Been a chairlifter at several weddings before. Not to be mean, but that dance is always longer than you think and the bride is always heavier than you think. Watched my brother smashed sing the entirety of Stairway to Heaven on karaoke at the reception. Don't really know if it's the worst or best. My horseback riding instructor told me a story of a time somebody requested a horse for a traditional wedding. I forget what culture, but I think it was Native American. They put the horse through the aisleway. These people surrounded the horse with firecrackers and sparklers in the small enclosed space. The horse then proceeded to freak out and bolted out of that place while destroying anything and everything on his way out. They never brought a horse to a wedding again. High school friend's wedding. Her future grandpa-in-law, the groom's grandpa, was the officiant. He dedicated 20 minutes of the service going on and on about how God created man with one head because 2 heads is too overwhelming. Therefore, there should only be one head in this marriage and household. Bride is to be subservient to groom. It was essentially him going on that she is about to be a slave to every future need and desire of her husband. It was ridiculous. There was an all-out brawl between 2 huge Middle Eastern ghetto families. Even one of the grandmas got into the brawl. Once grandma joins, it's over for everyone. I was best man at my best friend's wedding. I'm not gonna lie, I cry at weddings, but I was gonna make an effort not to cry this time. Everything was going well. The bridesmaids and groomsmen took their places, as did the groom. I'm standing next to my best friend, so happy for him. The song starts to play and his bride walks out and looks beautiful in her dress. I smile and look back at my friend to see his shoulders kinda bouncing. Then I heard a few sniffles and a quiet cry come from him. My first thought was, don't you freaking do this, but then it was too late and I shed a couple of tears and put my hand on his shoulder. It's a small thing, but the fact that I got to share it with one of the best friends I've ever had makes it very special to me. The maid of honor put on a jersey over her dress and a baseball cap. I think she hid it in a big purse, then started rapping about how proud and happy she was that the bride was getting married to a man that cared for her. It was really heartwarming and hilarious. I recorded it on my old phone, but sadly we couldn't get the video back. Someone next to me made a Fresh Prince of Bel-Air reference, of course. During a 3-day wedding, the first night had a raging party. Everyone had just really good clean fun. Nobody was heinously drunk or dramatic. The food was awesome. The servers were hilarious. The music was the perfect volume and style. Truly a once in a lifetime kind of party, and everyone had an absolute blast from the 90-year-old grandpa to the 1-year-old toddler. Next day was the wedding. The bride and groom are coming separately to the church, but the groom is late. He's stuck in traffic, but he'll be there. He is all ready and tooked up, so it's literally just slide into the church and get to the altar. He was nervous standing there because he'd been so late. 45 minutes because of the accident, but whatever. He is there now. Bride is stunning and doesn't care that things are delayed. Nothing can ruin this day. They say their IDOS and start to walk back down the aisle. Groom slams to the floor dead before he hits. Massive aneurysm took him out. Photographer has rapid shots of him going down. The traffic he hit on the way there was a result of the bride's grandparents in a car accident, also dead on impact. Holy crap. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.